My name's Javan. I'm an organizer with Service Employees International Union, Florida Public Services Union, and we are part of the essential workforce in the city of St. Pete. SEIU, FPSU, for decades has represented the workers of the city of St. Pete, Pinellas Transit, the non-instructional staff at Pinellas County School District, and more recently, the adjunct faculty at St. Pete College. Our members are the lifeblood of the community. They're the people who make our parks and recreation system work, the people who keep the IT department at the city working, the people who get our children to school in the morning and make sure our school buildings are safe places for the faculty and students here in Pinellas County and the city of St. Pete. As a public sector union, we recognize the importance of having strong leaders in our elected officials and people who understand and represent the interests of the communities they serve. That's one of the reasons that we endorsed Ken Welch for mayor in the city of St. Pete. His decades-long commitment to serving the interests of the people and making sure that St. Pete is a great city to live, work, and play in is essential to a bright future for this city. We're pleased to have Ken as our guest today in our Get to Know the Candidate series as we approach the St. Pete municipal elections on November the 2nd. It's also important to know that mail-in ballots are already coming to mailboxes. So by the time you see this video, you may have already seen your ballot come in through the mail. So please return that as quickly as possible. With that, I'd like to welcome Ken to our Get to Know the Candidate. How are you doing today, Ken?
Doing great, Javan. It's great to be with you, and thank you for SEIU, FPSU support. I'm looking forward to working with y'all.
Outstanding. So Ken, I'm really getting to know you myself, but I've been delighted to learn that you are someone who's got deep roots in the St. Pete community, and your family has been here really for generations. So let's start just by take us back to some of your fondest memories of growing up in the gas plant neighborhood.
Well, you know, my first job was at my grandfather's wood yard, which was right at 5th Avenue South and 16th Street. And there I learned, you know, how to work with my hands. We would go out and get oak trees and pine trees, cut them up with chainsaws and axes. I still have my grandfather's axe handle right here in my office. And we learned customer service, the value of work. I also learned the value of having someone that's financially literate. And so my granddad, after working hard all day, would walk home or about 4 blocks away and give all the money he made that day to my grandmother. And they were able to put my dad and all 3 of his siblings through college, 2 at FAMU and 2 at Bethune-Cookman, by handling that money the correct way. And so it just showed me the power of family, the power of hard work, what it meant to put in a full day's work. And then he'd serve at our church prayer tower, which is just a couple of blocks north of that, as a deacon. And growing up in that community, I've got a different perspective on where we are some 35 years later after that gas plant neighborhood was uprooted in the pursuit of baseball. And by the way, my grandfather's wood yard was displaced for I-175. It came in practically on top of where his wood yard was at 5th. So I've experienced community, but I've also experienced what happens when a community is displaced. And that's why I'm so focused on making sure we've got equitable redevelopment of the Trop site going forward, because that was a sacrifice of a community of almost 1,000 people, businesses, places of worship in the pursuit of baseball. And so we need to make that right.
And that is certainly something that's a hot topic in the community right now, as the redevelopment of that area looms large in the future of the city. And to speak about that from the lens of equity is very critical. But just as a human level, I think a lot of us have that desire to want to go back home and have, see, mom or dad's or grandma's house. But as you mentioned, a lot of people in the community don't have that experience or don't have that place to touch back to. Um,
Mhm.
how do you kind of experience that as you move through the community now? Because you've remained here in the city of St. Pete, your entire life.
Well, it's an opportunity to make those promises that were made 35 years ago of jobs, economic development, make those come to fruition now and not just have an impact for the Trop, but citywide. That's what the community benefits agreement is really about. And I strongly supported that. And what that means is when there's city investment in a large project going forward, that it will bring certain community benefits in job contracting and hiring, uh, even in affordable housing and other aspects. Um, we can't have development that exploits. We have to have development that builds shared prosperity for our community going forward. And that's the lens I bring it. Some folks refer to Tropicana Field as a blank slate. It's not a
Mhm.
blank slate. It's a slate that literally is etched with the sacrifice of almost 1,000 people that live there and call that home. And they live there because of redlining, which said these are really the only places African Americans could live, right? And now they were displaced for the pursuit of baseball. I'm thankful that when you make that argument and let folks know where you stand, that you get a whole lot of agreement. So in my discussion with the groups who are proposing to redevelop Tropicana Field, I let them know right up front that moving forward, this has to be equitable. There has to be participation. There has to be outreach to the community to make sure we've got, equitable hiring and make sure that we employ folks from the area. Um, and my discussion with the Rays are the same thing. There's a commitment there to honor the history, not just in words or a plaque, but in a tangible way that helps rebuild our community. And so I'm excited about just being able to move forward with some straightforward conversation about what we need to do, because we don't become the best community that we can be if we're not focused on equity as a priority, not only when it's convenient, right? But it has to be a fundamental part of the way that we work as a city moving forward. And folks know that up front when they have a discussion with me.
And this commitment to working in that way, and especially, in the city, is actually a family legacy for you. Your father was one of the first, or I guess the second African American to serve on city council. So you, from a much earlier age than many, probably had an opportunity to not only see
I
what
do.
it is to be a public servant, but also to focus in that area in particular, because as I understand it, your father also was there in the midst of that conversation around the development of Tropicana Field and how that would impact the community. How does that shape your outlook on this now?
Oh, it has a great impact because I watched him speak truth to power, uh, make sure that folks understood that these promises were not going to be forgotten, that the jobs, the economic development, even just making sure folks got market value for their homes when they had to move in the first place. But to the day that he passed away, he said that those promises have to be kept. And as we look forward now at the redevelopment of Tropicana Field, whether it includes baseball or not, that is a priority for me going forward.
Mm-hmm. And the potential historic nature of your ascending to the mayorship can't be overlooked in this moment,
Mhm.
as those conversations of equity are being had, as the history of the community is also kind of brought into focus. What, as an African American, what do you think you will bring to City Hall, to the office of mayor, and how do you think that factors in and is really a benefit to everybody to have that perspective in that office?
It's not a burden, it's an honor um, to be in a position to be the first African American mayor. We all bring our perspectives to the job. And so some folks have asked, well, how are you going to be different from Mayor Kreisman, who's endorsed me for the job? And my response is, look, I grew up in the gas plant area. I went to church at Prayer Tower in the gas plant area. I went to Melrose Elementary in the last year of segregated schools in Pinellas County. And then the next year I went to Bay Point and then to Lakewood. My life experience is different than any other mayor. And so what I bring to the job is that life experience. And so when you talk to me about fair wages, when you talk to me about affordable housing, when you talk to me about reforming the justice system, when you talk to me about being followed around a store, shopping while Black, I've experienced that. And I've written about that. I wrote about that 20 years ago in the Tampa Bay Times. You probably can look up the article about an experience shopping for music equipment on Seminole Boulevard. And I happened to be with 3 or 4 gentlemen who were either police officers or corrections officers, right? But we were all in plain clothes. We played in a church band, but we were being followed around the store by some officers who were literally glaring at us. And so I've experienced all of those things, and a lot of other mayors, I would dare to say none of the other mayors have experienced that. And so I just bring a different mindset and a different life experience, and that's going to shape the way that I govern as mayor.
And you come in with a lot of experience understanding what it takes to lead in government. 20 years as a county commissioner for the city of St. Pete, for Pinellas County, and District 7 covers primarily the south end of the peninsula, most of the city of St. Pete. How does that prepare you to really understand the mechanisms and processes of governing? Because, the political aspect of winning a campaign is one piece, but being in the office, understanding what government can and can't do, how it should work, how it can be a force for good, is a different skill set. How has your time at the county commission prepared you to be ready on day one?
I think it's taught me, number one, to be true to yourself and let your yes be yes and your no be no. And I think if you do that, instead of trying to be transactional on this issue versus the next one, number one, I think folks respect your positions, and maybe on 10% of the issues you can't work together, but on the other 90% you can. And I think that's why my endorsers are so diverse. There are folks that I've actually worked with on issues. A good example is the county's APAD program, the Adult Pre-Arrest Diversion Program. So that started with Steve Cornell with City Council. He wanted to basically issue a civil citation for small amounts of marijuana so that folks weren't being arrested for that. I agree with that concept, but the sheriff had a different take on it. Number one, other agencies wouldn't have to abide by that. So if the highway patrol came in or the deputies came into St. Pete, they wouldn't have to abide by that St. Pete ordinance. So we worked together and came up with a countywide APAD program that not only included small amounts of marijuana, but it included minor trespass, a whole list of minor issues that folks were getting arrested for and getting a record of arrest that then impacted them getting a job in the future. And we implemented that. We stationed someone at the jail who screened everyone who was brought in, whether you're brought in by Kenneth City Police or by the sheriffs or by St. Pete, and they screen those folks. And if they can enter the program, they never get arrested, and they go do community service and never have an arrest record. More than 4,000 people have gone through that program and ended up not being arrested. And that's because we're able to work together, even though we might have some different political allegiances, but we focused on an issue, right? Want to do the same thing with housing, want to do the same thing with transportation. Focus on the issues, bring partners together, and that's going to be my focus going in. So that's probably the biggest thing I've learned. One of the issues, one of the achievements I'm really proud of is we created the first community redevelopment area, CRA, in the county's history that's not in a downtown. Every other CRA, the CRA that funded the Mahaffey Theater, the pier at almost $100 million, excuse me, were all in downtowns, downtown Clearwater, downtown Largo. We did the first CRA focused on poverty ever in the county's history by bringing folks together, looking at an issue and saying, look, we've got 5 areas of county where poverty is growing. And we
Mhm.
are all paying a price for that. And the price was some $2.4 billion from folks having bad outcomes in education, bad outcomes with the criminal justice system, bad outcomes with the healthcare system when they're using the emergency rooms as their primary care. And because we're able to come together with consensus on that, we created the South St. Pete CRA, which will bring in well over $100 million that we can apply to housing and education and job training. And we've created the second one in Lellman, and now the third one is being created in the Greenwood area of Clearwater. And so those are some things I'm proud of, but the way those happen is by having an honest conversation with folks and getting folks to come together and develop consensus on how we move forward. That's what I want to do as mayor.
Mm-hmm. And that kind of work, whether it's in the criminal justice space that you mentioned with the CRAs, it really touches people's lives. And ultimately, that's what the work of civil servants comes down to, is real people, living their day-to-day lives. And are there some particular people that you have encountered over the years through your work, whose lives were changed for the better because of what you were able to do as a county commissioner?
There are. I won't give the names just for their privacy, but one of the things I led was creating or serving as chair of the first homeless policy group back in '06 after there was an infamous tent slashing incident in St. Petersburg. Where folks, and I understand the nuisance issue, but these folks, all they had was that tent covering all their possessions. Everything they had was in that tent. And a bad decision was made in St. Pete to slash those tents. What came out of that, I was chair of the homeless policy group. We worked with the Catholic diocese, with the county, with the city, and secured funding, which still is being funded at $500,000 a year from the county, to create Pinellas Hope on 49th Street. And that's a place where folks can go and first they're given emergency shelter, basically a tent. Then they move into apartments, permanent apartments with supportive services. They also have the container apartments, the old shipping containers that they convert into apartments. So now you've got a whole campus there where folks who have no hope can go get shelter, social services, move into a permanent apartment, and have all those social services, job placement right on the site. To me, that is something that will always stay with me. If we've gone there and served meals and talked to people who've come in there and they've been so thankful about having a way to rebuild their lives. And look, we found out when I was chairing the homeless policy group, a lot of folks are a paycheck away from being homeless. They're an accident away from being homeless. I've talked to folks who had a car accident, then they couldn't get to work. And a couple of weeks later, they're homeless because they're, living paycheck to paycheck. And so those are the stories that will stick with me. There have been a lot of other areas that we worked in, but being able to talk to those folks face to face and hear success stories is something that's really gratifying.
Mm-hmm. With 2 decades of service at the county commission, I'm sure you had just you probably forgotten more things than you remember from all of those many meetings and community events and whatnot that you attended. But if you could go back and tell your younger self something about what's to come on day one, what would you say to your younger self starting off in the county commission 20 years ago?
Always do what you think is right. And, mom taught me to do that really early. And so I've done that. There have been a couple of instances, though, where I think I should have been a little bit more vocal. One was on our election system. And if you remember, there was a time, and I'm a kind of a nerd guy, so I'm kind of a techie guy.
You're in good company here.
Good. And so we'd rolled out through the supervisor of elections office and the judge who was on the canvassing board, these digital voting machines, if you remember that. At one time we were all digital. And the alternative was optical scan. And I argued against the digital because, number one, there was no hard copy, there was no audit trail. Everything was digital. If you remember that, we had that for 1 or 2 election cycles. And I made the argument, and the quotes are still out there in the Times if you Google it, that we were not giving enough credit to optical scan, in that it did give us a hard copy paper trail, that it was more reliable, and everyone else was, including the Tampa Bay Times, were supportive of the all digital touchscreen. And I made the argument, made my case, but I ended up voting for the digital so that folks would have confidence in the system. If I had to do that over again, I would have voted against it. Ultimately, thanks to Governor Charlie Crist, a couple of years later, he made a decree that everyone would have optical scan with that paper trail. So that's the system we have today, and it's working very well. And then, of course, vote by mail came after that, which made it even more productive. But that was a lesson I learned early on, and then I never failed, even if I had to be the only vote against it, to do it, because most times, if you go with your gut, go with what you believe, things work out well.
So right now is a big moment of transition. I think the last year and a half, 2 years as we've dealt with COVID has forced a lot of transition. We've had a lot of difficult conversations in our community recently, whether that's about equity, development, housing. There is, I guess there's no shortage of challenges to be faced for the next mayor with the city of St. Pete. What do you see as the biggest challenge of all of those different things that's facing the next mayor, and how are you going to meet that challenge?
If I can be frank, I mean, I think the overarching challenge is getting out of this circus atmosphere and focusing on the task at hand. Even something like red tide now becomes politicized. What tribe are you in, right? We've got to focus on the issues in front of us. We've got folks dying in our streets because our young folks don't see opportunity and they do see guns. We've got a community where more and more folks can't afford to live here. There's a whole lot of luxury and market rate condos and apartments going up, not enough affordable housing for folks that make the average salary, which is about $23 is the area median income. So where's the housing for folks that make 23 or 17 or $15 an hour? We've got to be focused on that. Our infrastructure, we've got to make sure that we continue to invest in our infrastructure so we don't have sewer overflows, and so we can handle the extreme weather that we're seeing, the heavier rainfall. And so all those issues are issues that we need to be focused on. We really don't have time for the politics that I really think diverts us from the issues at hand.
Mm-hmm. And you hit on something critical with, I guess you say that youth don't see opportunity, but they do see guns. And too often when we talk about gun violence, the conversation moves to issues of moralities or values and things like that, versus, the stark reality that too often there are too few opportunities and not enough ways for people to seize what few opportunities there are. At the same time, the city has a lot of people who are retiring from the workforce, and these are critical roles that need to be filled, whether that's, just in keeping the city running, but also, making the city a more effective and efficient organization. How do you see the opportunity to connect young people who need good, sustainable jobs with that need for the city as well to have a well-educated, ready workforce?
Well, youth are one of my priorities. The first job that I had in the public sector was actually as a recreation aide at the Frank Pierce Center. And so I started out working with young people. But the thing that's most critical is that you actually sit down and talk to young people, not just talk about what we're going to do for them, but actually talk to the young people. And so this year, after we had, I think, the 13th loss of life due to gun violence, I called together a youth summit at a local church. It was undisclosed, no media, no social media streaming, none of that, because we do have the snitch issue. And kids are literally afraid to come talk to adults in an open format. And so we had that in an undisclosed location. We had Esther Eugene from the NAACP. We had some faith leaders there. We had community leaders there, and we had young people there. And we asked the young people, what are the challenges you were seeing? Why is the violence happening? Where are the guns coming from? And we got great input from our young people. And one of those young people who was a high school student gave us that exact quote. You keep telling us about opportunity. I can't see a way to get my hands on that opportunity. There are barriers to us getting to those opportunities. And then a few weeks later, on June 1st, we had an open summit at the Enoch Davis Center. And we brought in some young entrepreneurs from the South Side. Brought in Chris Roberts, who owns Urban Inc. on 34th Street and 22nd Avenue. He has 8 employees, is about to open his second Urban Inc. We brought in Trey Gillum, who happens to be my nephew, but he's also the producer, one of the producers for Rod Wave, and he was a former Gibbs High School star who got hurt. He was a basketball player, and he moved over to music, and now he's producing artists all over the United States. We had Lewis Murphy Jr., former NFL player, who's now a developer on our panel. We also had Kimbriel Finch, who's an aquatics instructor and owns her own company. And so these are 4 young people, all less than 35 years old, who are role models from the South Side, who are doing their own thing, have their own businesses. And we got them to interact with all the young people who came to that meeting. And we also had some surveying during that meeting to ask young people what they thought about certain issues. What continually came up is we don't have opportunities in our community. Mm-hmm. One of my opponents is talking about building something out west for the Science Center. Well, that's great, but we need something where the kids are, right? And so Enoch Davis Center is where the kids are. Childs Park is where the kids are. I want to upgrade those centers so that they are centers that are updated, modern, places where kids want to come. But it's not just for kids. Those should be hubs for the community, for seniors, for nutrition, for after school, for all those community needs. Those should be hubs and community assets. And we've already done this at the county at the Lellman Exchange on 54th Avenue North. Take a look at that facility and what it means in terms of being a hub for the community. That's what I want to do in South St. Petersburg, with a real emphasis on connecting young people in a number of ways, even career readiness. I spoke with a young woman who runs STEM Exposure in Tampa, and she works with Mayor Jane Castor. And she has young people using STEM, designing tiny homes for homeless veterans. They're doing that right across the bay in Tampa. And so those are the kinds of things I want to do. And it also connects kids with career opportunities and want to do that where the people are, not in some extended place where they have to overcome a transportation issue just to get to the service.
And keeping it close to home and directly there where it's easy to get to is just such a critical part in making those opportunities something that are not far away, but something that can be realized. And in that, I hear a lot about equity, investing in community, investing in youth. And that question of equity and the importance of it is really coming into focus for St. Pete right now. On the ballot, along with all the candidates, of course, are a number of charter amendments, 2 of which focus on building equity into the city, but also funding equity. or funding that work to make sure that those gaps continue to close. Thanks to the work of our union members in partnership with the city of St. Pete, this city boasts that it's one of the most equitable places to work. The gaps between in pay between for people of different races and different genders are smaller in St. Pete than they are in many other large municipal governments. And I think that's something to really be proud of and something to really stand on. How do you see that equity as being essential to the success of the city?
It's fundamental, and it needs to be intentional, not just transactional. When we go back to the community benefits agreement, I think that's a good example of the need for intentional equity. When city council paused on that and had questions of should the community benefits agreement, again, this is when a project receives city funding and is above a certain threshold, that they would have certain requirements to basically give back to the community, whether it's in hiring or contracting or other methods. And the question was, should this be citywide or not? Some wanted to limit it just to Tropicana Field. Well, look, the impacts of discrimination over the years were not only citywide, but countywide and nationwide. And so why shouldn't a CBA also be truly citywide? This city was built on labor, almost slave labor. My grandfather worked on the Gandy Bridge, worked on the railroads, as many other folks did. And so the infrastructure of this city was really built on that. You add on to that the gas plant era and what happened there. There was no reason for this very limited CBA. I think it should be expanded to not be citywide. I think Alan Delisle said if it had been in effect, only 7 or 8 projects would have come under the CBA. And so to me, it's a very small start. And equity, again, is a fundamental principle. It's not a feature. It's a fundamental principle of governing. And I'm glad to see these charter amendments moving forward.
Mm-hmm. I think we all are. That with the community benefits agreement really puts some weight into what in too many places is sounds good but doesn't really lead anywhere. These are there's some opportunities for equity and inclusion and reinvestment in the community to really be meaningful.
Absolutely. And you don't want it to be dependent. A lot of it depends on the mayor making it a priority, the council making it a priority. And that might be great until the next mayor doesn't make it a priority. Mm-hmm. And so when it's embedded in the charter, that gives it additional weight that's longstanding.
Absolutely. One of the pledges you made in receiving the endorsement from FPSU was not to outsource services and union jobs because you see them as critical for our community. Why is it important that these services stay within the city, but also that they stay union jobs?
Well, I've had an opportunity to support union workers. I served more than a decade on PSTA and served as chair there, and have always supported. It always seemed reasonable what the union was asking for. You just want fair wages. You want your workers protected. And again, these are the folks who make our community run. So why would you outsource something that can be provided from folks that live, work here, children go to school here, they worship with you? To me, that just makes sense. Your heart's going to be where you are, and if you're in a different city or state, it's different than having someone who's grounded here and has family here. And so I've always thought it was better to have support for our local workers, local organizations, local businesses. That's why I led the expansion of the small business program with the county under Dr. Cynthia Johnson. I happened to be chair in 2018 when we hired our new county administrator, Barry Burton, and he knew coming in that was a priority. So what he did is he made it a priority within the county organization, gave Dr. Johnson a dotted line to him, gave her the staff she needed, implemented software so we could track utilization. And they were able to increase the small business participation from $70,000 a year to $20 million a year in just 2 years. without a disparity study. And St. Pete has the advantage of having a disparity study that just came through. And so by making it intentional, we were able to make sure that small businesses got a fair share of the county business. And that's better for our economy, and it's better, I think, for us moving forward to make sure that we're supporting local businesses and supporting our local workers as well.
It certainly is. Coming back to as protecting workers, we can't really think about this time without thinking of the impacts of COVID. And a lot of, whether we're looking at school districts or municipal governments or even at the state and county level, the issue of vaccines and mandating those is it's a contentious issue, and rightly so. We're talking about people's health, their personal decisions. How do you navigate this? What are your thoughts on the best way to make sure that the most people that can be vaccinated are vaccinated, and other protective measures are put in place?
I think you do it by relentless education, relentless communication, and doing so from a place of, it's corny, but a place of love. You're not hammering somebody, because, oh, you didn't get vaccinated. It's, look, here's why I think you need to get vaccinated. Here's what can happen if you're not vaccinated and you're in contact with someone who has an underlying condition, grandmother, someone who has, diabetes or some other condition. And so we kind of went through this in my last year as a commissioner last year during COVID. We had to cut to the science and the facts and not make it up, you're bad because you won't wear a mask, or, you're good because you do. Here's what we need to do to keep our emergency rooms open. Here's what we need to do to keep our ICU units open. We need to do these things, and here's what the science says. So I think you just have to consistently hammer on that. I had some folks in my own family who I had to consistently hammer, and we got one of the last ones vaccinated about 2 months ago. Just showing her some examples. Was, you saw what happened over there, right? Well, they weren't vaccinated, and then their grandparent, ended up getting very sick. So it's just that kind of relentless communication, advocacy, but not doing it in a way that demonizes the other person.
Mm-hmm. As my grandmother would say, you get more flies with honey than you do with vinegar.
See, you said it in 10 seconds. It took me 3 minutes, but you said it in 10 seconds. That's exactly. But I think the more evidence, more and more folks are getting vaccinated. They're seeing it, especially with the Delta variant. More and more folks are doing that. But until we get that base of folks vaccinated, there'll be more and more variants, and at some point, the vaccines lose their effectiveness. We don't want to get to that point.
Mm-hmm. Very true. It's like the goal is to move forward and put this thing behind us as quickly as possible.
That's it.
So I like to come full circle as we're approaching the end of the conversation here. One of the things that I've learned as I was preparing to speak with you is that your father actually has some interesting history with our organization. Florida Public Services Union was founded thanks in no small part to the sanitation workers' strike in 1968. And, that was, I think, a time when there was a lot going on in our country and in the city of St. Pete in particular. And your father, David, played an important role in helping to bring that strike to a close. Growing up in that time, seeing your father work so closely with people in the community, and I imagine the sanitation workers were your friends and neighbors. You probably played with their kids and went to school with their kids. How does that history kind of loom in your mind as you continue to do this work?
It's huge. Growing up as a kid, you don't understand the impact that your father had. He also had a income tax office on 16th Street, just a little bit south of where my grandfather's woodyard was. And they call that the South Side City Hall, or the Black City Hall, for a long time, because folks would pop in, they're talking politics, they're talking about a project, or I do recall several times when there was a shooting or something that happened in the neighborhood, he'd leave, 11, 12 o'clock at night to be on the scene. And I remember asking him one time, Dad, why do you have to go? And he said, that's what I need to do. And I just learned from that. He also had that office. My mom ended up selling it to PERC, and my dad used to serve on PERC's board. And my dad always had, ex-offenders in and out of the tax office, giving them odd jobs or giving them. And I remember asking him as a young kid, I'm like, why do you always have these, hard guys coming in here? And he said, they needed, a chance for a second life, just like anybody else. I didn't know that he wrote his thesis on career education and vocational jobs as a way to get ex-offenders back into the mainstream. That's what his thesis was on. So I'm still learning stuff about Dad, but his commitment to the community and for everyone in the community, not just the folks in the political class, right? But the everyday folks and folks who not, in many cases, have made a mistake, or folks who, have been down on their luck. That's what I want to always try to remember, that it's not, after you've been in office for 20 years, folks kind of put you on a pedestal. Always need to remember folks who are struggling every day to day just to put food on the table, just to keep their kids in school and to take care of their parents. And also remember the folks that actually make our city and our county run. And a lot of those are members of your union. So he leaves an enduring mark on my work every day.
Mm-hmm. So final question. If you could achieve any one thing in your time as mayor for the city of St. Pete, what would it be?
Well, we call it inclusive progress. And that means all the progress we see in the city, that everyone feels that they have a part of that progress and that they're not displaced by the progress that we're seeing. And so that, whether it's transportation or housing or youth services, or even getting our sewer and water systems where they need to be, that everyone feels they're a part of that progress, that they have input into that progress, and that they have input into the mayor's office. That's what I want to see.
Mm-hmm. Ken, I want to say thank you for joining us today, for speaking to our members and the community about your experience, your history here in the city of St. Pete. Want to remind everyone that the time to vote is November the 2nd. If you have received your mail-in ballot, please fill that out, vote for Ken, and get that back in the mail as quickly as possible. And also be sure to vote on the charter amendments that are critically important to the long-term success of the city. Thank you.
Thank you, Javan. I appreciate it.